Late afternoon, Pacific jungle, 1944. Heat presses down through the canopy, thick and unmoving. Sweat runs into a man's eyes as he kneels in the dirt, wrists bound behind him with coarse cord that bites into the skin. Around him, boots shift. Rifles are held loosely, barrels pointed downward, as if what comes next is routine. Cicadas scream. Somewhere beyond the trees, the ocean breathes. He is alone, an American uniform stained dark with mud and blood. No helmet, no weapon, just breath, slow and controlled, and the sound of his own pulse in his ears. The soldiers surrounding him speak in short bursts, orders, laughter. The language is sharp, efficient. This is not an interrogation. There will be no march, no camp, no exchange. In the Pacific War, execution is not an exception. It is doctrine, timing, and opportunity. The man lowers his eyes to the ground, memorizing the space in front of him, the angle of the nearest rifle, the distance between bodies, the uneven roots beneath his knees, because survival here has never depended on hope, only on seconds. And the seconds that led to this clearing began long before he was captured. By the time this American was forced to his knees in the jungle, the Pacific War had already stripped itself of illusion. By 1944, the conflict between the United States and Imperial Japan had become a war of distance, attrition, and annihilation. It was fought not across front lines, but across islands, small, humid, violent pieces of land, whose names would later become synonymous with exhaustion and death. Guadalcanal, New Guinea, Tarawa, Bougainville, Saipan. Each was taken yard by yard, ridge by ridge, foxhole by foxhole. Unlike the European theater, surrender in the Pacific was rare. For Japanese forces, surrender was culturally and doctrinally rejected. Imperial Japanese Army field regulations emphasized death over capture. Prisoners were viewed not as soldiers who had lost, but as men who had forfeited honor. This belief filtered downward into frontline behavior, where captives were liabilities, mouths to feed, guards to spare, risks to morale. As American forces pushed westward in their island-hopping campaign, they encountered this reality again and again. Intelligence reports from 1942 onward documented systematic executions of captured airmen, scouts, engineers, and wounded infantrymen. Some were beheaded, others bayoneted. Some were used for labor briefly, only to be killed when units moved or supplies ran low. American command learned quickly. Training manuals and field briefings began to reflect it. Soldiers were warned, capture did not mean survival. Patrols were instructed to avoid isolation. Medics carried pistols. Radio men were told to destroy equipment before capture. Every man was expected to understand that falling into enemy hands in the Pacific was not the same as being captured in France or North Africa. At the same time, Japanese forces were being compressed. By 1944, the strategic situation for Japan had deteriorated sharply. Allied submarines strangled shipping lanes. Air superiority shifted decisively to the Americans. Garrisons on outlying islands were increasingly cut off, undersupplied, and abandoned to fight until destruction. Hunger, disease, and exhaustion shaped battlefield behavior as much as ideology. In these conditions, Japanese patrols hunted aggressively. Small American units, recon teams, engineers, runners, survivors of ambushed patrols were prime targets. Captured soldiers were rarely marched far. The jungle itself became the execution ground.
It was into this shrinking, brutal space where doctrine, desperation, and geography converged that one American found himself alone, cut off from his unit, moving through terrain already thick with enemy eyes. The island sat on the far edge of American maps, a long green shape marked by ridges, swamps, and narrow coastal trails. It had been bypassed once, then returned to when intelligence revealed that Japanese forces were still using its interior to stage harassment attacks against nearby shipping lanes. By mid-1944, American control of the sea and air meant little to the men operating beneath the jungle canopy. On the ground, the enemy remained close, quiet, and lethal. American units assigned to the island operated in fragments. Battalions were broken into patrols. Patrols were broken into fire teams. Engineers cleared trails and airstrips under fire. Scouts moved ahead of the main force, mapping ravines and river crossings. Supply lines were thin, radios unreliable, and terrain often erased the difference between friendly ground and enemy territory. The man who would end up kneeling in the clearing was not reckless or alone by choice. He was a trained soldier, part of a small detachment tasked with moving between positions, carrying messages, checking perimeter gaps, reconnoitering jungle routes that maps could not capture. These assignments were given to men trusted to move fast and think clearly when separated. The jungle made separation easy.
Visibility collapsed without warning. Trails vanished under rain. Streams flooded overnight, forcing detours that broke contact. A single missed hand signal or delayed halt could scatter a unit into isolation. Japanese forces understood this terrain intimately. They avoided large engagements and waited instead along choke points, stream crossings, ridge spines, narrow clearings where movement slowed. Sometime in the late afternoon, contact was lost. There was no dramatic ambush, no explosion, just the realization, after minutes of cautious movement, that the sounds behind him were wrong, too quiet. The jungle does not go silent by accident. He turned, adjusted his route, and tried to regain his bearings. It was already too late. Japanese soldiers emerged from the foliage with rifles leveled and bayonets fixed. They did not rush or shout. They closed the distance with discipline born of repetition. Resistance would have meant immediate death. He raised his hands. His weapon was taken, his gear stripped, his wrists bound. There was no interrogation. The patrol commander assessed the situation quickly. One prisoner, no transport capacity, limited daylight. They marched him only a short distance before stopping in a natural clearing, wide enough to see, narrow enough to control. The ground bore marks of boots, scuffed earth, dark stains half-washed by rain. As the soldiers formed a loose ring around him, rifles settling into place, the American understood what was coming, not from rumor, but from experience shared quietly among men who fought this war. He lowered himself to his knees, feeling the roots beneath him, counting bodies without lifting his head. Fear did not arrive as panic. It arrived as focus. His breathing slowed. He felt the cord around his wrists, tied quickly and imperfectly. He listened not to words, but to spacing, the scrape of boots, the shift of weight, the proximity of steel. American training in the Pacific emphasized one truth: hesitation killed. Men were drilled to react, not deliberate. Decisions had to be made at the speed of instinct. He did not think in sentences. He thought in fragments: left, right, closest rifle, loose knot, distance. From a tactical perspective, the situation was nearly perfect for the captors.
The prisoner was unarmed, bound, surrounded. The clearing limited escape. Rifles were positioned at short range. But execution formations carried weaknesses. They required proximity. They assumed compliance. Weapons were held close for control, not distance for defense. No perimeter was established beyond the circle. Focus turned inward. By 1944, many Japanese units were exhausted, undersupplied, and operating on routine as much as doctrine. To them, the kneeling man was already dead. The jungle hummed. A rifle shifted closer. A command was spoken. In that space, between order and action, the Americans stopped thinking about death and started thinking about movement. In the Pacific War, technology favored proximity. Dense jungle collapsed combat into arm's length. Rifles were long and slow. At close range, leverage mattered more than caliber. He had trained for this, not as hope, but as contingency. If capture meant death, resistance had no downside. When the first movement came, it was small, almost invisible. The command was short, flat, routine. A rifle stepped closer. His wrists twisted inward, tightening the cord until the knot slipped. Pain flared. He rose just enough. He lunged. His shoulder drove into the nearest soldier as his hands clamped onto the rifle barrel. The shot went wide, cracking into the trees. The clearing exploded. He wrenched the rifle sideways and fired from the hip. The man collapsed. He dragged the rifle into the next body and fired again. Smoke and noise filled the space as spacing collapsed and formation disintegrated. There was no pause. Rifles collided, bayonets caught. Men rushed forward instead of spreading out. The American moved constantly, firing, dropping weapons, seizing others. A bayonet tore his shoulder. He ignored it. A rifle butt crushed a face. Another shot rang out before the body hit the ground. Seconds stretched. Bodies fell. The execution detail dissolved into close quarters chaos. The fight accelerated. He fired until rifles clicked empty, threw them aside, grabbed more. A pistol appeared in his hand. It emptied in seconds. Surprise inverted fear. Some tried to flee, others charged. Neither worked. Time fractured. 7 minutes passed. Then silence. Smoke thinned. The American stood alone, chest heaving, hands trembling only now. He reloaded. He listened. He scanned. Only then did he count. 54. When friendly forces reached the clearing, the scene stopped them cold. Weapons were collected, statements taken. The account was given without embellishment, movement by movement. Reports traveled upward, stripped of emotion. The lesson traveled faster. Do not assume control. Do not close distance. Do not believe the fight is over. The American returned to duty without ceremony. The clearing was reclaimed by rain and growth. Within weeks, little remained but memory. In the end, the clearing became a mirror of the Pacific War itself, compressed, relentless, unforgiving. 7 minutes revealed years of doctrine and strain. Not heroism, but preparation. Not certainty, but survival. A single act of refusal, executed under impossible conditions, endured not for spectacle, but for clarity. In war, the line between life and death is razor thin, and it is always drawn in the moments when instinct and preparation meet.